Thank you, and welcome to the session. I like to think you're going to get a lot from today. I'm sure our leaders will agree with me when I say we're far from perfect at this, but we've been doing it for a while, and we think we've got some lessons to learn along the way. For context, if you didn't know already, HubSpot is 17 years old. 5 years ago, our international marketing team was just 5. It's well over 100 today. We have over 180,000 customers coming from more than 120 countries. So we think we've got some experience to share with you today. And so with that, I'm actually going to hand it over to our amazing leaders to introduce themselves. So Susie, starting with you, please tell us about your role at HubSpot, importantly, where in the world you're based, and what's covered within your remit and your role.
Absolutely. First, the most important part, I'm based in Stockholm, Sweden. That's in Europe, far up. And I'm responsible for our international marketing teams here at HubSpot. And I've been doing this for the past 5 years. Super excited to sit here today with you and this amazing panel and people that I work with on a daily basis.
I'm Sunil Desai. I lead the global brand and creative team here at HubSpot. And I live in Miami by way of a global pandemic.
And I'm Emmy Jonassen. I lead our global inbound demand generation, and I'm based right here in Boston, so a very short trip for me.
Amazing, thank you guys. Where I want to kick off is a bit selfishly, it's the question that I get asked the most when it comes to international marketing, which is very much around that, well, how do you structure your team? How is global marketing organized? And Susie, I want to start with you because you were our very first leader hired to look after and grow the international business 5 years ago at HubSpot. You have led us through some incredible transformations to a point where international is a significant part of the business. So curious to hear from you, what did international marketing look like at that time? As I said, we were only about 20 marketers then, but what have you implemented and how have you helped develop and build out the international organization?
Great question to start off with.
A big one.
A big one, yes. The interesting part in this also is I also get that question a lot. It's the frequently and by far the most asked question I get is like, how do you build your teams? How have you built scale within HubSpot? And how have you been able to grow globally your business? So when I joined 5 years ago, I was hired to take this on. So of course it's a topic very close to my heart. But in essence, the way we had been operating up until then, very successfully so, was based on an inbound strategy, which clearly, as I hope all of you know, it's about educating markets, adding value before you extract value, sharing valuable content in multiple channels all over the world. So it worked really well for us, but most of our international investments were based on localizing this, I would say, working well, but very English-focused program. So one of the first things I started thinking about when I joined was looking at like how relevant are we actually in market with these programs that we run? Are we really able to answer the questions our local customers have? Are we relevant and authentic for our customers? So we wanted to look at that, and in an inbound model, the way to think about investments usually is based on language. So the first thing we did was think about an investment framework for how to go international, to make it easier for us to make these investments. Usually every year when we went into planning, we had debates on who do we put in what team, what competency is needed for what market, how specialized shall we be in each market. So we built this framework, a 2x2. The whole world can be simplified in a 2x2. And you can see the one we use here. We looked at the world from a language perspective first. So you see here the vertical axis is how much of the programs we run do we localize? And when I say how much, I also mean what programs do we actually think about from the get-go being created in market versus what are the programs we localize that are central but that we activate in market. The other thing we looked at was the competency aspect of it. So is it a domain and a specialist competence that we need, or is it a regional expertise that is needed? So that is the horizontal axis, and that articulates where a competency should sit. So naturally, me representing the region, where we have in region are people and investments that are specialized on that market, that really understands the market, that is able to articulate the needs of the customers and partners in that specific market. While in a domain expertise, you have a specialist competence optimized mostly for the volume of the market we are doing. But it doesn't take out the need for it to be in language, of course. But this is a very simplified approach and a framework we use to think about how we invest in market. And we still use it today, so it's working.
Yeah, no, it's fundamental, and I think you're going to hear our other speakers today touch on the 2x2, because it really became the model of how we make decisions about certain investments. So we're definitely going to hear more about it. But just to give an example of a specialized competence, right? We're talking about SEO here as one example. You need deep domain expertise here. So we stuck that in the global teams is ultimately what this model is telling us. But that doesn't mean you don't need regional input.
No.
So how do we think about bridging the gaps between regional and central teams, even in areas where there is mostly global or centralized team ownership?
Yeah, there are ways of doing this. If we talk about aligning teams, the number one thing that is important for us, or my recommendation to all of you looking to expand globally, as most of you raised your hand, hitting on that road, the most important thing is to align on objectives. Yeah. I think it's impossible to have separate teams and to have a central function and a regional function if you work towards your own specific team goals. You need to ensure that you all align and roll up to the same objectives. Not only the marketing objectives, of course, but the company objectives as a whole is extremely important. So that is a super strong bridge. It's aligning on those objectives. But also, another thing that I think is really important, if you own a program, and most of you raised your hand when you asked the question about whether you're in a central function, is to ensure that you build in scalability from scratch. One of the things I did when I started working for HubSpot is I always constantly had the curious question, not to provoke, but to really make sure that our other leaders and the central owners understand that, do you have the lens of international on when you're putting your program into market? Yeah. I think it's really, really important. So align the objectives, ensure you co-create and build programs, playbooks together. Yeah. Don't come in last minute and say, hey, woo, regional teams, I'm about to launch this amazing campaign. What do you think? By the way, all images and it's a word play, and good luck localizing it. So it's really about having that international lens on from the get-go, align the objectives, and it's going to be a much smoother process.
I think where a lot of brands trip over themselves is we need a headcount for every function in every region. Something you introduced to help bridge alignment here without just necessarily adding headcount and replicas was something called an international champion role that has been deemed extremely successful. I'm a big fan of our international champs, but maybe you could explain to people, what is an international champion role, what purpose does it serve, and how does that fit into our 2x2 model up here? Yeah.
So it's interesting because we started the champions 2018, the year I started, and the way we think about champions is if objectives is a good bridge to align teams, the champion is another good bridge. So the champion roles are roles that help educate central programs and central teams and central owners about the needs of the regional marketing team, or more so the needs of the regional customers. But they also help take our central programs and our foundations international. Yeah. So it's really the glue and the bridge, and it works very well for us, especially in functions associated to more, to marketing programs that are globally agnostic, such as, for example, our product. It looks the same all over the world. It's not specifically developed for a certain market. And in those areas, we've really agreed upon, like, this is the framework of our product. Yeah. We have a product marketing champion that runs this for us. So it's super effective to have that bridge. So I highly recommend it.
Yeah, you'll hear many regional marketers say we wear so many hats.
Yeah.
And we might not be responsible for the website, but we need to have input on whether what is being done on the site works for us. And so we have an international champ for web as well, right?
Yeah.
And I think they are just so incredibly helpful in taking that weight off of regional marketers by helping communicate. And most importantly, even if your teams are pretty good at bringing regional teams into decisions, my biggest complaint is that it's normally too late in the process.
Yeah.
And
Early involvement.
Yeah, we need earlier involvement to make sure that things happen that we don't then have to change further down the line.
Yeah.
International champs help make sure regions have that input much, much earlier on. So I'm a big fan of them, obviously.
Yeah, and scalability technology is a big part of that as well. Building frameworks that actually work, that you can actually take internationally easy.
Yeah.
So it's super important.
Moving a little bit more into the specifics when it comes to execution. When people put marketers in region for the first time, one of the first activities I find they go about doing is localization. Localization, I think, has been sort of quite grossly had a narrow view. And when we typically talk about localization, we're really saying take an English asset and translate it into non-English. So take it from your US website and make it make one for Japan, for example. This is a really limiting view because it doesn't consider localization among English-speaking regions. Being in Australia, having been born in the UK, I appreciate that there are a lot of differences just between the US, UK, and Australia. We're talking about the diversity that we want to see reflected. We're talking about humor. Australian humor is very different from the US.
But it's good.
It's good humor. It's good. It's just different.
So good.
And everything from humor and pop cultural references that we want to see, right? And so localization is actually far more complex. And there's a trend, I think, where regional marketers are really seeing this as that next way to resonate with their audience. And then we did some research that further backs this up with LinkedIn, where we found that the number one thing or priority for our APAC marketing leaders was to implement local strategies, which is fantastic on one hand, but it does create some challenging conversations around how much do we implement locally? How much do we localize? To what point are we, not having, impact with this anymore? And channel ownership comes up a lot, right? And Emmy, you look after many of our core paid acquisition channels. So I was hoping you could talk to us a little bit more about how you think about international, certain activities, and channel ownership.
Yeah, the first piece of advice I would give here when determining whether something should live in a central or regional team is to develop a framework that really works for your business. We use our 2x2 that Susie just walked us through as a framework, and it really helps guide us to answer exactly these kinds of questions to help get us out of this vicious cycle that we were in before of really agonizing over every single use case that was brought to us. Should this live in the central team? Should this live in the regional team? And so developing that framework really can help guide you in answering these questions. And for us, if you look at that 2x2, recall that we went over earlier, there was 2 points that we really anchored on. And that was, does a function need to have specialization or deep domain expertise, or does it need to have deep regional expertise? If a function needed deep regional expertise, we would keep that on a regional team. And if it required deep specialization or domain expertise, that's when we would centralize it. And we wanted to centralize specialized functions because we wanted to create centers of excellence where everybody who existed on this function was able to learn from other subject matter experts, so the function as a whole grew stronger and stronger over time. We also found that by centralizing people who worked on these specialized skills, it developed really clear career pathing for them. And then finally, having all of this specialization living in a center of excellence, what it enabled us to do is not just support regional teams, but really to support any kind of business unit that wanted to take advantage of this specialized skill. And I think to illustrate this, we can go back to the SEO example, because I think that's a really good one to illustrate this in that SEO definitely requires specialized skills. It's a technical marketing skill set. It's also interesting because it's rooted in language. The way that we search is based on what language we speak. So at HubSpot, we have a center of excellence for SEO. It's a global center of excellence. It's headed by a head of SEO, and then underneath that head of SEO, that global head of SEO, we have SEO teams built around every language. So we have an English SEO team, a French SEO team, a German, et cetera. And each one of those SEO teams within their language services a lot of the programs that need SEO insights within that region.
Yeah, and you own a lot of those channels, SEO, paid.
Yep.
So you could sort of say in response to that, do regional marketing teams have a role in demand if they don't own those core channels, if they don't have that domain expertise? And does your opinion on that differ from English to say non-English as well?
Yeah, they definitely have a role. What I'll say is that a lot of our big demand generation programs are owned by the central teams. And that is because a lot of our big demand generation plays need to leverage a lot of these specialized skills. So if we think of paid advertising or SEO, any program that leverages those two skill sets are run by the central teams. And paid and search, those are the two channels that we drive most of our demand from. So it's mostly owned by the central team. What I'd say about regional teams is regional teams definitely have a role in demand generation, but it's more of a supportive or supplemental role. I think where the value of a regional team really comes in is in their deep regional expertise, which we talked about earlier on our 2x2. That's kind of how we organize the company. They know their markets inside and out, backwards and forwards. And where they can really help with central demand plays is supplementing them by leveraging the local publications, influencers, channels that they have access to help accelerate demand within the region that the central team might not know about, nor may they have access to. And actually, Kat, as a regional marketer yourself, working in the APAC region, you probably have a good example that you could cite around a play that you ran to supplement a central demand play.
Yeah, it's a good question. The way I always think about demand in region is what are we uniquely positioned to impact that a central team can't? And it's normally the stuff you need on the ground teams for, and I think partnerships is a really fantastic example of that. There are some great brands in Australia that haven't made it global yet that have our natural fit audience that we should be working with to untap an audience that our SEO strategies, our paid strategies might never tap into. So it's really about unlocking local audiences that those channels won't. Always within reason though, right? If we're doing co-marketing or partnerships and we're seeing, 50 leads, there has to be some sensibility in it, but there is definitely a lot of local brands that we work with that we can run on the ground plays, whether it's events, whether it's co-marketing, that are just a natural fit for us to help impact demand. But it is very much that idea of supplemental demand where you have those deeper, higher volume channels for it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really about the value more than the volume market, which is the key thing in the whole conversation and in the 2x2 as well.
Sunil, what does this look like for brand? How do you think about brand from an international perspective? And I guess really what I'm asking here is the big question, which is it actually possible to have one brand platform that can solve for all countries, all regions, all languages?
I think it's important for every company to have a brand promise that is universal. So, for example, everyone here is familiar with Nike, and they are basically out there trying to convince anyone that wears Nike that they can be an athlete. At HubSpot, our promise is we help companies grow better. And I think it's important to have a universal truth, but when we get into individual campaigns, that ends up being far more localized and nuanced. So you would have various brand pillars that you might dial up or dial down based on the market. Cultural values really matter here in terms of messaging. For example, we know in Germany, data and privacy are really important. So to engender trust in that market, we have to lean into more of those messages. So I think, in summary, have a globally relevant brand promise, but at the campaign level, you do have to sort of tweak the imagery, text, et cetera, to adapt to local relevance.
Yeah. So I think from brand to demand, Susie, obviously localization is far more than just direct translation from English into non-English. But I guess to help us articulate it, how do you think about localization? What role does it play? And what can people in the room be considering when it comes to localization? What's worth the effort?
Yeah, it's one of the hardest questions to ask. And I think the way that I think about it, as a regional marketer, it's very easy to say, hey, we're different. Yeah. Make it different for us. it's very easy to say that. I say it, I'm Swedish, and I think I'm very unique, of course. But in essence, what it comes down to is like, what are the things that we, if we make them different in region, will have a better impact and will be more relevant for the customer. Yeah. So very simplified, for me, localization is really about understanding who you're talking to and what their needs and their drivers are versus your inside perspective of that you're very different.
Yeah.
Right,
Like
I think the word they use is transcreation now, which is like you want to take the, you want to adapt the text, the imagery to feel very local, but it still retains the promise and the emotion of a sort of global brand truth.
Yeah. I always get nervous when people talk about translations.
Totally.
So I love transcreation and I love the concept of localization and base it on the needs of the customer. So regional marketers will really, really, really need to understand their market, the unique needs of prospect customers, partners, and work from that versus the we're different, so make it different for our markets.
Right.
We need to understand that.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, Susie, which is determining, understanding when it needs to be really unique and when it doesn't. Because at HubSpot, there's a lot of plays that we run that are truly tailored for the region that they're speaking to. But then there's a lot of plays that we run that are tailored to the language. So it services multiple regions. And I think HubSpot, like every other company out there, we have limited resources. Yeah. And so we need to be very picky with where we actually drill down to the regional level and tailor it in that way versus when we can bring it up a little bit and tailor it toward the languages. So we're always keeping, ROI impact in mind. Is this going to give us the biggest bang for the buck? Does it need to be really tailored in this way, or can it be tailored up a click at the language level?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's key. It's the volume aspect again. If we're about big volumes, we're going to go maybe a bit further away from relevance sometimes, but we'll get the volume. So it's really important that when we go all in and natively build something, we have to know that it has a value impact for the audience that we're,
I think that's marketing in general, though, right?
Yeah.
Because marketing is definitely part math, but also part magic. And so what I think, Emmy, you're saying is like you have to optimize on the math and where you can get economies of scale. And then you want to leverage your regional teams to really help build that magical sort of connection within each region.
So Emmy's math and I'm magic.
I don't want to simplify that. But
or you're the magic, and I connect it. No, just go to the side.
But to give a good example of this, going back to HubSpot, we have an English blog.
Yeah.
We don't have a Canadian blog, a UK blog, an Australian blog. We have an English blog. It is optimized for the English language, and it is meant to serve all of the English regions that we have a presence in.
And we've tested this.
Yeah.
I mean, you and I have had conversations about, the demand's a little bit down from the website. Like, can we play around with the blog and maybe find a way to Australify it? And it just doesn't work because our blog is very how-to, right? It's very instructional content. And the way that you would do, search for how to do social media is exactly the same way you'd search for it in the US versus Australia. But then in other areas, we've tested and seen some really surprising results. So my team in Australia were really curious about how much would accent have an impact. And so we were running some audio ads on podcasts, and we took the script, which at that point had a US voiceover accent, and we did the same script but with an Australian accent. And we had a 13% increase in impressions, and we had a third more leads influence just by changing accent. And that's that idea of, localization is beyond just direct language translation, but it's actually familiarity, it's resonating, it's accents, it's all of those things. So I think you have to test where the wins actually are going to come from when you begin to localize.
And also in volume programs, we test this, of course, in our automation programs as well.
Yeah, you have to test to know what that looks like for you and if the return is there. I think what we're moving into naturally is the brand side of things, because all of this is arguably very much a brand experience, and we're very lucky to have Sunil on the panel with us today. And I know you would agree with us, brand is crucial in any organization, in any market. What I often find talking to organizations is sometimes how surprised they are. They've had great success and resonation in one market, and they move into another where they're relatively unknown, or there's a competitor that's really dominating that category already. In addition to this, a lot of our, if I can make my clicker work, in that same research I spoke to earlier that we did with LinkedIn, we actually found that brand marketing was the #1 channel that marketers in Australia and Singapore wanted more control and ownership over. I'm sure, Sunil, you have mixed thoughts and reactions on that. But in addition, when we think about the pressure that we're currently seeing on performance, when we continue to see some brands have limited budgets, and even marketers reporting some saturation in their normal go-to demand channels, there is a bigger debate than ever, I feel, over brand versus demand. So, Sunil, can we get your thoughts on how you think about brand and its impact on driving business growth?
Well, I think I can answer this question in a few different ways. First and foremost, I think based on what we're seeing with AI impacting traditional marketing tactics, personality and point of view are going to matter more than ever for a company to stand out, because lots of different parts of marketing, like SEO, are going to be commoditized. So you need that ability to stand out from the pack in your competition. Also, it's going to be much easier to start a business than ever before, so you can expect increasing competition. So I think you will find companies investing in brand as a shortcut to create trust with customers, because that's effectively what brand is, right? You're creating consistency, your customers want to know what to expect, and you want to be an authority in your space. When it comes to how much ownership, regional versus central, I think the truth is most brand people are probably quite precious, and for good reason. I think the goal is, with a brand, you're trying to create familiarity, not sameness. And so the role of, say, a central global team is to establish the brand foundations, perhaps in partnership with regional teams if they're already established, the brand truths, the brand colors, the logo, the type, et cetera, and then package all that up into a playbook or toolkit for international teams to actually run with, and then adapt as needed. They can kind of adapt the language, the phrasing, for the local markets, but some things are definitely sacrosanct when it comes to brand, because you don't want all these different elements out in the world. You want to retain some brand integrity.
Yeah, 100%. And on that note, and it'd be mean for me to ask you for HubSpot examples because you're fairly new, but prior you were leading global brand at Shopify. You've led some incredible global brand campaigns. Is there anything in addition to what you've said that you would maybe consider key to building a great global brand partnership? Maybe some tips for the audience today on tools to support that?
Yeah, I think you have to recognize where your brand awareness and product category awareness is in the market. So I'll give you an example at Shopify. We were recognizing that Japan had a really incredible consumer base, one of the top retail consumer bases in the world, and yet they were very much a brick and mortar first country. And that makes sense. Japanese retail experiences are you enter into different worlds. They're incredible. But the idea of direct-to-consumer commerce, really novel. And so we spent a lot of time educating the market on what online retail looked like. And so whereas in North America, you might have more aspirational messages around go start a business and entrepreneurship, in the Japanese market, we actually used our brand marketing and campaigns to really show the transformation of offline retail to online retail and how you can make that leap. So what I would say is, depending on your market, you have to assess what is the category awareness, and do you have to use brand in a more functional manner than you're typically used to?
Yeah. For those in the room that might be in our category here of wanting a lot more control and ownership, and maybe they're asking their organization for more investment into brand, do you have any tips for marketers to get that brand investment?
I think with increasing pressure on budgets these days, I think every brand leader actually has to be much more data-driven. You have to start being comfortable with measurement. And if you're spending lots of money on big upper funnel campaigns, are you, the basics, are you tracking aided and unaided awareness? If you're overseeing social channels, are you tracking engagement, impressions per post increase? If you're managing PR campaigns, are you looking at increase in placement over time, message penetration, share of voice? You have to start showing attribution of your work.
Yeah.
And I fundamentally think the worlds of brand and demand are coming closer and closer together. Emmy and I work a lot, and what we're finding is that there are some leading and lagging indicators. On one side, there's a big correlation between brand marketing and brand search.
Yeah.
The other thing I think we shouldn't discount is directional data that what we found at HubSpot, for example, is when we launch a campaign, we typically see higher ASP rates and deals closed.
Yeah.
And so the impact on long-term profitability is quite there, but you want to start unearthing some of those elements as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say, Sunil, +1 on branded search. Sunil and I stay very closely aligned around that metric because if you think about all the different search terms out there, branded search offers the highest ROI for us. So we care deeply, deeply about branded search. Of course, there's a real threshold to branded search in just how many people are searching for HubSpot and HubSpot-related terms. And what we've seen is that in markets where we have a strong brand presence, we tend to see a higher brand search volume. And we see that trickle down into demand generation, meaning we can capture and convert more volume from those branded terms and also into ROI and revenue.
Yeah. And something I really like what you said, and I agree with Sunil, is that brand marketers need to get a lot more comfortable with metrics and being data-driven. But I would also argue leadership need to get more comfortable with different types of metrics, which is the more directional ones you're talking about.
Absolutely. I think, at the end of the day, brand marketing is part art and science.
Yeah.
It's, any brand marketer has to have both a sort of creative and analytical mindset.
Yeah.
And there is an element of the role where it's intuitive, it's sort of gut instinct on what you think is going to resonate in market. And so I sometimes say, even internally, like, you're going to have to take the leap of faith with me and hope the net appears. So,
are there any brands, in your opinion, getting this right, that are doing a good job?
I think the brands in recent history that, and I think I'm obviously biased, having most recently come from Shopify, is in the direct consumer space because they built brand equity very quickly. Then you see it in like traditional companies like a Nike or legacy brands. One that we used to talk about a lot is Gymshark. It's in the UK, founded by a 19-year-old pizza delivery boy. And he was really into fitness and working out, but he used the sort of social media, I think before influencers were influencers, landscape to really transform his business and brand and really started finding unique insights about his customer base, and now it's global. And I think what is really interesting is the social landscape unlocks a lot of opportunity for regional marketers.
Yes.
Right? I mean, you find a lot of Australian influencers, I assume, and APAC influencers to really help catapult a brand and extend it globally pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Can I add to this?
Yeah, of course.
Because I think what you're saying about Shopify's history and about educating markets, it's really what we do at HubSpot as well. So I think one company that is getting it right is actually HubSpot.
That's right.
Not biased. But I think the key thing for us has been over the years, like we've established categories inbound through educational content and by adding value to markets before we extract anything back.
Right.
So it's really been key for us to build our brand without having done like massive out-of-home advertising or similar things that you might normally associate with brand. And I think you always say everyone works in brand. See, you have a large organization, but like brand is so much more than just the brand team that is a function usually within marketing, or like almost always within marketing. But I think it's really keen to point that out. We've built our brand based on providing really helpful educational content, very similar to Shopify in certain markets. And to your point, it depends on where you are in the world. We say things differently in, for example, LATAM, where we need to have a little bit more educational content, and to your point, more aspirational, broader vision here in the US, which we can consider maybe our home market. So absolutely critical.
What Susie's referring to is we were talking backstage, and I said, I actually think that every person in a company works on brand because every customer experience to me is effectively a brand experience. So whether you're in marketing, sales, or service, you work on brand. Because any interaction, especially if it's negative, affects your reputation.
Yeah. True. We heard in the spotlights with our founders and Ahmadi about we heard a lot about AI, really. And I don't think we can have a panel discussion on really anything at this conference without at least once touching on it. Now, one of the big criticisms when we talk about generative AI on brand is this idea of it's going to create a lot of sameness. It's really going to become commoditized, even personalization. Sunil, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, and do you agree with that? Is that an impact we should be aware of? What can people in the audience do to prepare for that?
You know, this is something Kip and I talk about, and we sort of landed on, like, listen, at the end of the day, creativity is priceless. It's the execution is what's being commoditized with AI. So you're able to iterate much more quickly than ever before. And so we're using it internally on our creative team right now. Like, we're sort of thinking through a brand refresh, and we have some ideas, and we can quickly use Midjourney to kind of at least see initial concepts. So you bring something from, you know, idea to life very quickly, and then iterate from that. But at the end of the day, point of view and personality matter, and that's why I think you can't stifle creativity, but you can use AI to your advantage to actually bring your concepts to life.
Yeah. It's not just brand, though.
No,
right?
it's not just brand. I think we're seeing a lot of different aspects across marketing being commoditized. The one in demand that I'm really thinking a lot about, and I'm sure many of you are too, is content marketing. Content, especially how-to education-based content that we have used for many years to try to rank really well for specific terms, to bring clicks back to our sites. It has never been easier than now to create that kind of content because of AI. And on the flip side, I think it's going to get a lot harder for marketers to grow organic demand as search engines start to add AI-powered search. People adopt that more, and they can get answers more quickly without leaving the SERPs. And so I think for content marketers like us, really thinking about how we need to fundamentally shift our strategy to really plan for this is very important. And the 4 areas that we're kind of thinking about at HubSpot are, in an AI-powered world, conversion rate becomes so important. And I think brands need to get exceptional at converting demand on their website. And AI can really help with this, because AI can provide a lot more conversational and personal experiences on the site. Sunil, to your point, standing out, getting your content to be different in the world of sameness is going to be really important. Strong point of view in content, personality-led content are going to be mechanisms that you can use to really have your content stand out. I think another shift that we need to think about is, for years, we've looked at content marketing as a way to, again, rank really well in search engines and drive clicks to our site. In this new world, we're still going to have to do that. Whoops. But the other thing we're going to have to think about is how we can use content as a way to train LLMs to actually mention our brand's name in conversations. And then the last thing, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about distribution and how user behavior is changing. Many prospects are starting to move more toward platforms like YouTube and TikTok to look for education and also entertainment. And it's not just because they're going to the platform itself. Many people are going to those platforms to look for education and entertainment from specific individuals on those platforms, influencers and creators. And so I think there are many things that we need to think of as marketers of how we're actually going to adapt to the changes that AI is bringing on, as well as these user behavior changes, so we can continue to defend and grow this organic demand.
So Emmy's been thinking about AI a lot.
I think we all have. Yeah.
But Susie, I think that's really exciting when it comes to content for regional marketers, because we don't traditionally have a place in that how-to content because of what I said earlier, because, well, that's the same globally. But when it comes to point of view, that's where it gets very exciting for regional marketers. You know, some of the best responses we get from content, whether it's an event that we're pitching, a talk that we want to give, or it's journalists, the content that always lands best is that based on research that we've done, and therefore our point of view of what is happening in the market. How is that impacting our region? So that point of view content, I think, is a really exciting shift for regional teams. We have less than 5 minutes left, and you have all been too nice and agreeable. I want some more debate from you. So I have a couple of quick fire questions for you, and what I might suggest, if you have questions for any of our speakers today, grab them at the end. You're going to be around, right? Yeah, great. So quick fire questions, well, as quick as you can. I know you all like to explain and be very detailed. Susie, I will start with you and we'll go that way. My first question is, you are setting up a brand new team in a brand new region at HubSpot. Who is your first hire?
I do this frequently.
Yeah, I know you do.
Yeah.
You got a bit of a head start.
Okay, 100% I would go for a very commercial-oriented marketer that understands the market and understands how to sell and understands the customer.
Good, quick answer.
I know you want attention, but I'm going to agree with I'm going to agree with Susie and not. I'm a brand guy, not saying brand, but there's a reason for it. I think you want a commercial person, partnership manager, because you need to sort of understand the ecosystem of the region, the customer landscape, the partner landscape, to unearth what do they care about, what are their pain points, because it might be different market to market. That's the insight you need to actually bring back to a global brand team, and then determine, do we need, local strategies to solve for this, or can we use existing central strategies?
Yep.
I'm going to disagree a little bit here. If we have a central model set up where we have motions in place in our key distribution channels of search and paid, and we're going into a new market, I think I would hire an in-region person who speaks the language to help us get these motions set up so we can start cranking on demand, because I believe distribution is king, and it's really difficult to grow in a market if you don't have that motion in place.
So you're saying we're hiring in your team.
Yeah. That's not the regional.
To support the region.
Yes. Yeah. The toughest challenge in leading international expansion as a marketer?
Focus.
Yes.
It's very hard. There's a ton of things you can do, but it's really the focus and ability to identify the things that matters the most that will make it or break it for you.
I agree.
Focus.
Mm-hmm. I actually think one level back, it's choosing which markets to invest in and deepen your particularly brand investment in. Do you go after the biggest TAM, or do you look at ease of doing business and where you can have like low-hanging fruit to capture?
True.
Hiring. I think hiring is very difficult. When you're going into a new market, it's already hard enough to find really good talent in a new market, but also at the same time, you're often learning the local hiring laws. And for many regions, it can be a very long turnaround between the time you actually put a role into the market and the time you can get a person in seat, which can impede your ability at times to move very quickly and aggressively in a market.
Yeah, fair point. This next one, I'm just going to actually ask Sunil and Emmy first. I will come back to you. But in your experience, what is the #1 area international marketers want more control over in their region?
Social. Everybody wants to start a local social channel for their country or their region. And I would say more power to you, except I don't think that folks recognize sometimes the amount of work it takes to have the frequency of posting and content creation. And so my recommendation is, if you can commit to doing the work, by all means, but I do think that sometimes you have to really weigh like the ROI on that.
Yeah, and I've heard you say in the past it's actually more damaging to have a social presence that's got really low engagement, really low volume of activity.
Hasn't posted in 3 weeks.
Yeah,
it does more damage than actually having the channel to begin with, which I agree.
For me, it's the website. When I speak with a lot of regional teams want to see a lot of customization to their market on the website, turning Z's into S's, lots of different examples. But we try to, there are certain parts in the website that we do actually customize to region, because we see, again, it comes back to that ROI. Yeah. Where are we going to get our biggest bang from a buck? Those are the places we want to customize. Everywhere else, it might not be worth the time investment.
Okay. Yeah. Susie, I'm coming back to you because I asked them what they feel like they get asked for most. What would you like to ask for most? What is the thing that you think regional teams truly need more ownership on to really supercharge the growth in their region?
I think I know this, saying this in a very humble approach. Mm-hmm. Local relationships, we own.
Mm-hmm. You have to own them.
Independent of the relationships being within our org, with the sales org, or with our customers in market, and local stories. Mm-hmm. I believe those two things are fundamental for a regional marketer to own.
Yeah, I agree. We see this a lot with sales teams, right? Yeah. Sales teams get so much thrown at them, and you need that one place where they can go to for advice. And when it's coming from so many different teams, I say this with love, but there's so many global programs who think their global program is the most important thing that regional sales team should be pushing, focusing on. And yeah, I think the regional teams have to filter that and own that.
Yeah, because you actually help them find the signal through the noise.
Yeah. We are exactly at time, so perfectly timed. Thank you so much. I hope that was valuable to you. Please give our speakers a round of applause.